Good morning and welcome to Leading Dragons podcast number 9. Today we have Sarah Winkles on as a guest. Good morning, Sarah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. The pleasure's mine, Sarah. Thank you. Before we step into an introduction of who you are and why you're here today, I would like to go back to the meaning and the mission of Leading Dragons and what it is. Leading Dragons is not only a think tank. Leading Dragons is way more than that. It's really an invitation for all of you listeners out there to pause, to slow right down and to think what it is that you need to shift in order to step into action and start creating that change, no matter how big or how small it is, that you want to see in your life, particularly in your working environment. Today, more than anything, the world feels more and more divided, particularly this year with the 2020 pandemic that's come on and it's just swept the whole globe. And with such a changing landscape, we really need to, more than ever, we need to pull ourselves and we need to unite. Because with division comes fear, and Leading Dragons are fearless dragons. Now it's easy for us to say that, but what is fearless leadership? Well, why do we need to step into that space? Why do we need to step into that dragon energy? Well, it's because if with fear, what comes, there's lots of behavioral changes that happen. There's panic there, and that's panic because we are feeling uncertain about what's happening, these upheavals, lots of questions. People are questioning everything that we see in the media, the decisions that are being made in senior levels, in the C-suite. Questions everywhere. We're wanting to know the truth. We're wanting to understand what is behind the decisions that are being made. And so with fear comes, like I said, comes panic. And that's linked to, like I said, uncertainty. And I went back this morning, Sarah, like I said to you, back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so in the baseline, we have the basic needs, which is obviously warmth, shelter, water, and food. And once those are satisfied, we step into the middle part of his triangle, which is psychological needs. And this is where uncertainty sits, because, or should I say that the need to feel certain, we need that psychological safety. And that's been stripped away from so many of us this year. Hence the division, the divide of us, the divide of opinions, the trust that's falling away, and organizations that are being are collapsing or experiencing upheaval. So Leading Dragons is not about self-fulfillment. Leading Dragons is about leading fearlessly through the fear and with courage, and despite, faced with that adversity, faced with that uncertainty, that we don't stay stuck. We decide to get unstuck and to step into the right direction. Anyway, so Sarah, welcome to this podcast number 9. Tell us about you. You are a world champion in rowing, and many other beautiful things. So I'll just leave it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, and I love what you talked around that, because I will introduce myself in a second, but from the place of fear, our neuroscience shuts down, our adrenaline, our cortisol are higher, and our thinking brain is harder to access because the real deep parts of our brain are holding on to the blood, if you like, because they're getting ready for fear, for flight, for freeze, or perhaps tend and befriend. So I think where you're really cognizant of the output of fear on the individual, and also your other challenge to move a think tank into an action tank. I love that as well. And the quality of our thinking changes, of course, the quality of our decisions, which changes the quality of our actions. And again, from this place of fear, it is harder to think. It takes more energy. And I guess, you know, I'm Sarah Winkler, you'll have heard from that. I'm fascinated by the brain and neuroscience and our human performance, our ability to work optimally, be at our best. I think I saw that clearly when I was an athlete. That was a physical performance, but there was a technical, a psychological, and a physiological element to that. When I didn't have actually enough blood going to my brain because it was going to my legs and my lungs, I had to trust my ability to keep doing the right technical things, to move a rowing boat, which was my craft. I had to think about it in the right way so I could deal with what happened on the day, but deal with what happened before the day. And actually the enormity of thinking I'm a human being, and these amazing behemoths of individuals are the people who are world champions and Olympic medalists, and starting that journey to see me go from how I saw myself, which certainly wasn't as an Olympian and an Olympic medalist, to actually moving in that way. So that journey of getting out of my own way, because actually I'm 6'3", I've got lungs the size of a horse, and you know, I do have a morphology that, if I can get the psychology right, of course, could be an elite athlete. And I now work in leadership and coaching, having really wanted to support, you know, I learned how to create a performance within a small team and a legacy within hopefully British rowing, and I'm incredibly proud of that. However, I also wanted to make that impact bigger, the ripples wider than just rowing and just sport. So I've been lucky enough now to work in business and sport, and lead some sports teams and set up platforms for those athletes to perform at their best. Because in any career, there are moments that you want to be able to work at your hardest. You can commit yourself to your craft, if you like, whatever it is, and at that point you absolutely want to be surrounded by the people that can support you and develop me, and actually be excited for you on that journey, because it gives you energy. And I think the neuroscience piece, why am I interested in that? Well, I did psychology as part of my degree, and in fact, let's go back to when I was 9 years old, and I understood for the first time. I was in this brilliant lecture. I think lecture's too grand, but it was a brilliant talk that was put in a way to 9-year-olds that helped me understand that I saw the world differently from the other 9-year-olds in the room. And I walked out of that lecture changed. I have always been fascinated how we see the world differently, each one of us, and how, if we're prepared to share that, you get a fuller viewpoint. And so that was really interesting. I think that led me to psychology. And when I did my degree, we didn't have fMRI scanners. We weren't able to see the brain lighting up, as is in common parlance. So what the neuroscientists, I guess, or psychologists of the day looked for was people with brain injuries, and they looked at the behavior. So how had the behavior changed? These people were very, very carefully studied. And when they passed, the brain was cut up, and then people said, right, okay, that bit of the brain's missing, therefore that is connected to that behavior. At the time, we were trying to map the brain. Now, because of neuroscience and neuroplasticity, we know, of course, the brain can slightly change, re-alter, repair, and that's massively powerful. And that's powerful for me personally, because I have the gene for Huntington's, as my mum died of Huntington's, and to watch her struggle through that journey for 30 years was amazingly sad, but amazingly inspiring as well, to watch how her brain could rewire and adjust, and she could develop new skills when it was incredibly challenging. And knowing that that might be my journey is definitely part of who I am.
And thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. And so you live with Huntington's condition, and I'd like to ask you, so my question to you is, how does that impact you on a day-to-day basis, and how does that impact you on the life decisions that you make?
Yeah, it's a good question. So mum got ill in my teens. We didn't know what it was. We had no words for what was going on with her. She just changed and became a really different person, and not in a good way. And it wasn't until my 20s that she got diagnosed and I understood I had the gene. So I was quite young, and mum had got ill, let's say at 40. So in your 20s, Deborah, I think, you know, you feel, well, that's fine. The scientists are doing brilliant work. You know, in 1994, for the first time, they discovered the gene for Huntington's. So they understood they could test people and tell you whether you had the gene or not. And that was amazingly powerful. And it felt like time after time there were, it's not dissimilar to COVID, is it, at the moment, but since that time when I discovered I had the gene in the late 90s, there have been moments where scientists have started to go, we think we know what is causing it. So we know what the gene is, but now let's look at the mechanism that's causing the damage. And then actually, once we understand the mechanism, we can find a point to break it or change it. And so I sort of lived not fully following the science, because actually, interesting, my dad's done that brilliantly and he curates that for me, but also getting to know the scientists in my latter years, because in 2004, I got a chance to do some press and, if you like, reveal my genetic status. And I chose to do that before my second Olympic Games, because it felt that I did have a platform. And with a platform, I could potentially make a difference, because Huntington's has been a hidden disease. The illness manifests in changes of mood, memory, and movement. So it used to be known as Huntington's career. So there was the career movements you would see. Short-term memory can be affected, and mood, you see a lot of depression with it. Mm-hmm. And so somebody in the family would go a bit strange and potentially become hidden. People didn't understand it. So it was a very isolating and hidden disease. And for me, I felt, what could I do differently? What I could bring it out in the open and bring sort of hope to the community. And, you know, you can have a positive genetic diagnosis or a negative one and go on to do great things, you know, or go on to do with what you can while you can. And when and if illness hits, I won't have any regrets. You know, I have been lucky enough to be free to pursue the things I truly love and the passions, and make a difference in the way I wanted to. Hopefully make a small difference to the Huntington's community. I'm patron of the Scottish Huntington's charity, not because I'm Scottish, as you can probably hear, but because they asked me. And it was a family started charity, and it starts with the patient at the heart of everything they do. And I'm just so proud to be able to support them and raise some money, raise awareness for that. And then personally, you know, I try and do what probably we all should be doing, is look after my brain as well as my body. Mm-hmm. So I'm becoming, you know, more convinced as we go through this. Sleep is the first pillar of health. And anyone who's a young parent, I'm sorry to say that, because I know it's really tough on your parents, young children, to get your sleep. But luckily neuroplasty and neuro repair can help afterwards. But, you know, we need to get our sleep, and that's for brain health as much as body health. We need to really eat for the work we do now. So I no longer need 6,000 calories to propel a boat along, but I do need nutrients, and the right nutrients to keep my neurons in the best state they can. And exercise and activity, it's simple things, but by doing those well, having the breaks, I know I believe I can make a difference to when that illness manifests. And the belief in the research is that difference could be between 3 to 5 years. And that's a long time in science. You know, we may have got a COVID vaccine in 10 months. That hasn't started, you know, 10 months ago. There wasn't a standing start. But if I can keep myself well for that time, and the scientists can do their work, they might be able to help me have a good second half of my life.
Sarah, listening to you, you're such an inspiration, and I feel really honoured to have you on. And you are my first MBE dragon, so my first dragon who's been awarded member of the British Empire through your rowing medals. And also, I see, first and foremost, I see a fearless lady, a fearless person in front of me. You're courageous in bringing Huntington to the surface, so it's no longer taboo. It's not something to be ashamed of or whatever, but it's actually something to deal with. And even just that, I imagine, took courage, just like, you know, going for the Olympics, and now moving into, well, which you've been doing and which you are, into leadership, and trying to break through together with the organizations to create that change. So be that catalyst. So I just see bravery written all over you, and it makes me want to ask you a question. Well, invite you to share a story with us where you were faced with fear and chose not to let it stop you from doing what you needed to do.
Oh, no, thank you. And I fear fear every day. You know, no one, I believe, is immune to fear. That's our wiring. It sits in us. And I think for me, I really needed, when I was younger, certainly, people to believe in me. I was brought up in a fixed mindset. I was good at something or not. I was talented or not. And I think in that place, I developed some really positive traits of, you know, working really hard, you know, really pushing myself. And that's almost what I did when fear manifested. I just ran at it harder. I worked at it harder. And Deborah, that's not a sustainable place to be. I know so many of us are doing that, you know, just run at it and go and grab everything while you can. So I think probably the most mature I'm going to use, as I'm now in my 40s dealing with fear, was learning to stop. It's easy for me to keep going. I love life. I love my work. I love what I'm doing. But actually sitting with fear and not running, for me, has been a real learning. And I think this year it's probably been the first time that I truly had to do it, because we were locked in our houses, essentially, or we locked ourselves in our houses. And, you know, to face who you are and where you are is a difficult thing when you've been running for that, and learning to sit into that. And I think when I look at a less mature version of this fear, the am I good enough was something that really propelled me to my first Olympic Games. I lived every day just asking that question, am I good enough? I'm not good enough. The imposter was driving my behavior. And I mean, if you go from the difference of sitting still to do, you know, I did everything I could to prove to myself, not anyone else, that I was good enough. And, you know, just relying on the evidence and noticing it from a balanced way was a really hard thing to do when I was in fear and am I good enough? Because whenever something went wrong, it got maximized, and it sat in my brain, and catastrophic thinking would, you know, something had gone wrong in a training session. My goal was the Olympic Games, and therefore the coach would never trust me again. My colleagues would never trust me again. You know, I wouldn't go to the Olympics. I'd wasted the last 2 years. And by the way, I had Huntington's, and what the hell was I doing? You know, all of this thinking would come out. And then what would be the response? Push all the thoughts down, push the feelings down, and work harder again. And that was really successful for an awful long time. But I also broke 2 ribs. I have bulging discs in my back. I wasn't wise enough to know when actually I need to listen to those voices. And when you're doing elite sport, you are putting your body and your emotions on the line, like many people will be doing in their careers and in other areas. You know, you are pushing yourself because you're excited about what you want to achieve. But it's having the confidence to stop when fear is driving you. And I only really began to learn that in my 3rd Olympic Games, when, as a group, we were talking about how can we be the best we can be in a team, and when did we potentially need to step back, and when did we need to push on. And most people I know don't need pushing on, they need holding back, because maybe I'm lucky with my friends, but and my groups and the people I work with, but the most people I have the pleasure of working with are driving themselves forward, and they need to pull back and reflect a little bit so they can go faster later.
I mean, that fear that you described goes back to the start of this podcast, where I talk about our psychological needs. And there's fear because there's uncertainty. And when we know, or we choose to step out of our comfort zone, this is fearful. This is like, okay, so I'm moving into unknown territory. I have no idea what's going to happen. And it's having to somehow rewire the way we perceive things and the way that we see things, in order to detach ourselves from the outcome and just go with the flow. So hence fear. And that's why, so most of us, the majority of us, we spend so much of our time stuck in that fearful space, until finally we're either pushed, we have no other choice, or we actually, like a lot of people that I've met and I've connected with this year, who have said that actually 2020 was my year where I started looking into myself, and I decided to do the inner work and choose to shift, and focus away from fear, but onto what it is that I wanted in my life. And so, Sarah, let's talk about competition, because you're a professional competitor in your Olympic days, and naturally you've got this ambition, this natural ambition, and this bravery to bring this into with your clients in organizations as a leadership facilitator and a change catalyst. One key aspect of the current organizational paradigm that's breaking down is individual competition. Yeah. And we see that with and why is it breaking down? Well, we see that it's becoming obsolete because it's not working anymore. It's not doing anybody any favors. The absenteeism is increasing. Turnover is increasing, as in people turnover is increasing because of burnout, because of sick leave, and so on, because there's too much pressure and focus on the individual. How do you see individual competition in organizations, and what do you believe needs to be done?
And it's really interesting you asked this. I was on a reflective day yesterday on a Zoom call like this with some colleagues, and actually we were looking at the climate emergency and what we can do as an organization to influence leaders to think about that and prioritize that. And we were asked about the values, to reflect on the values that we think have created this climate emergency, and then what should they be replaced with. And I didn't know you were going to ask that question, but the value I came up with was that has caused it is competition. And what I think it needs replacing with is stewardship. And what I mean by that is, how do we, when we're working in, you're almost stewarding a role, you're trying to leave the role in a company in a better place for the next person to come into it, the next, if it's generation or colleague to come into it, rather than the competition of striving to get everything you can out of the role, although that is important. My own personal growth, I think, is important, and leave it in a better place. So for me, how can we, and I think it's where we got energy as a rowing team. We clearly were in competition. You only had 4 to 8 places in a boat. You had more individuals training their hearts and souls out to get those places. But while we were competing against each other, it was dangerously seductive to make sure you just weren't the worst. You were, especially when I was trying to come into it from that, am I good enough place? And we weren't genuinely stewardshiping ourselves and each other to be at our true best. And through our mindset shifts to, am I the best I can be? And that, comes to stewardship. It's not a day, it's a month, it's a year, it's a 4-year cycle. Or to, are we the best we can be? And actually where we want to then is ensuring that the next generation of rowers could come in and succeed. They had platforms to perform on. Suddenly you've got a system that's virtuous. When someone new talented comes into the system, instead of being seen as a threat in competition because they might take your seat, well, that's the reality. They might take your seat, but they're going to make the boat better. And if you maximize them and work with them, you then get a better end result. You get a bigger, in companies, a bigger pie or a bigger, piece to work with. And hopefully we're stewardshiping not only the roles, but ourselves. So we're not going to those burnout places. You're not driving yourself, because burnout, my belief, doesn't happen from working hard necessarily. It happens from trying to cure an unfixable problem. It happens when you're not properly cared about. It happens when we don't feel valued. So there's a real personal piece. And of course, the tasks need to be clear, but the people need to be cared for. That's psychological safety. And we have psychological needs as human beings. And they're not met as part of a troop, part of a pack. Potentially, that is damaging. And that's where burnout starts to manifest. And in athletes, we start to call it overtraining nicely, or we've overtrained them. And then at the end of that, you can also get burnout. And what you see is performance coming out. And if I put it into the physical, and I know you've experienced this, but into a physical place, an athlete who's gone from training 3 or 4 times a day may be able to do 10 minutes a day. They go from 6 to 8 hours a day to 10 minutes, and their bodies will not be able to respond to that because.
But that's fascinating, because and it's so we're talking about the individual competition, which is a threat. You talk that it's even dangerously seductive, and obviously this is just to align with the few agendas at the top, right? And so those people who are looking for command and control and greed. Unfortunately, these are elements that are still extremely prevailing around.
And I would not necessarily say that it's only aligned to people at the top. So I think it can happen at every level. I see it happening at every level. So I work in organizations that people tend to come in and stay. So that you then start comparing yourself to the person who is came on the same day as you, and how far you've got versus them. We know that ladder of a career, the straight way up, no longer exists. So often, as I think Sheryl Sandberg said, it's a jungle gym rather than a ladder, because life and life events change, and your priorities can often change. Yet somewhere in the back of our heads, if we're not going as fast or far as someone else, we're failing. So I think that competition piece can be really healthy. It can give us a sense of excitement and serotonin, but when it becomes destructive, it's a bit like Leccioni and his conflict. When you go artificial harmony or personal attack, you've got a sweet spot in the middle.
But then with healthy competition, so that is what you called stewardship.
Yeah.
And there's something that you said that I would like to just dig in a bit deeper, which is this is where we can, each one of us, be at the best versions of ourselves. So my question to you, Sarah, is, what does it mean to be the best version of ourselves? And is it reflecting, is it in with a reflection with others because we're working in a collective space? Or is it personal sovereignty? What is it? How do you see how would you define what being at our best, what it means?
I think that changes. We're an unfinished product, which I love. We can always be better, stroke different. You talked about sort of coming out of your comfort zone, and actually I love it when I come out my comfort zone, when my heart beats. That kind of bit, I think, oh my God, I'm uncomfortably excited. One of my colleagues, Kirk Vallis, talks about uncomfortably excited, because actually that's where growth and change can happen. I think when you're in your panic zone, which is beyond the stretch zone, if you like, clearly that becomes a really difficult place, and that is where overwhelm happens. Yeah. So I think it's an unfinished project. I love it when I see clients and colleagues align their purpose and their values to what they're doing, and they're being valued for what they bring, and also that their thoughts and ideas are recognized and heard. I think that, and when we're working at pace, it's really challenging to do so. But at the moment, we're solving wicked or adaptive problems. We've never seen this before. And we definitely need all the voices in the system to come up with a better solution.
Yeah.
And for people to be heard. I often ask when I'm working in any businesses, what's it like when you're not listened to?
Yeah.
And the answers come back. I feel devalued, I feel angry, I feel hurt, I give up, and yet we don't listen to people time after time.
But this goes back to, and this goes exactly back to the fear, right? So we can choose, and it's I know it's easy for me to say, it's a lot harder to do, but we can choose how impacted we want to be on with the context. So the the uncertain business landscape that we're doing our best to operate in. We can choose that. And you talked, on several occasions, just Sarah, just then, you were talking about, listening. But until we are fearful of the future, and so long as we're impacted negatively on the uncertainty and the adversity that we face, how can we begin to start listening to others, let alone ourselves? And this goes back to the behavioral changes. And with the chaos that 2020 has brought about across businesses and institutions and organizations, it's brought up all these questions about, okay, so how am I operating? How am I operating with this? What is it that I personally need to change? And my very first dragon said, it's not organizations that change, it's people who do. And
so are organizations.
Sorry?
People are organizations. Organizations aren't there's an entity of the energy of the people within the organization, but you're spot on, energy comes from people. Yeah.
So we have to start with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving into that realm, which is we have a lack of visibility. We don't know. So many businesses have closed down, slowed down, and hanging on to dear life, trying to survive and trying to shift the way that they do things, and also try and plan, in the next 6 months, never mind, 2 to 5 years. I mean, that's I imagine that's not really happening right now at the table. Across any organization at the moment. It's more like, right, okay, so we're having to deal with this crisis. What do you believe organizational leaders need to be asking themselves and each other as they navigate this crisis?
I think it's a great question. So where I see real value working with organizations and leaders is actually when you bring them up out their organizations and they see what's happening for others. So normalize the really difficult decision making that they're having to make. This is a really difficult adaptive system, and it's understanding who you're listening to, where you get your knowledge. Of course, as we go through this crisis, as quickly as possible, move out of the crisis management to start coming into an adaptive system, even if that's 3, 6, 9 months into that, and start to scenario plan for the future. And throughout this, it's so important that they care as much as they can for their people and look after themselves first and foremost, because a leader at threat, as you can imagine, the neuroscience, the very conversation we had at the beginning, they're human beings too. And as they sit in threat and fear, their thinking brains will be harder to access, their brilliant prefrontal cortex. So how do they really support themselves and their leadership teams who are having to sit around the tables or around the Zoom calls and make these decisions to support each other and sit with that uncertainty together, because it's really, really tough.
And just like the Harvard Business Review says, like many others, employee burnout is a problem with the company and not with the person. So, you know, we talk about care. What does it mean to care? And it's actually being able to still function and start looking after one another through this crisis. And typically in the human being in an organization, especially when there's pressure, a lot of pressure, for instance, a deadline has been brought forward, or the budget for a given project has been cut, or whatever it is, people naturally tend to go off into their own silos and, you know, and then sort of hunker down and do what they got to do, stay away from trouble, when in fact, we should be doing the exact opposite. We should be leaving our desks, leaving our silos, getting together, because we are all together in this given whatever crisis time. And like I said right at the beginning, it's about, we are being divided. Let's unite, you know, because we are in this together. Uncertainty is ever. We've all been pretty much, you know, operating this year on, if I can say, at least a low level of anxiety, for a million different reasons, and they're all valid reasons. But that's not a reason to forget our neighbour, to forget ourselves, and it's not a reason to not get curious about how can we start caring better and looking out for one another and supporting one another.
And you're spot on, because from that connection, you start to get oxytocin, you start to get different neurochemicals, and that does bring down, we know, the neuroscience and the anxiety, and empathy, really listening and caring about someone else, and being curious about what it is like to be in their shoes, is sometimes talked about the biggest pill, because it creates such a good shift in our neuroscience to open up our brain. So even if you think, I've got lots to do, actually by doing this, you're going to be in a better state to be able to do the other work that you need to do. And nothing in our memories really is or our experience is the whole answer in this crisis or this adaptive system. We don't have a blueprint. You can't look for it and hope it's going to come out in some of the company archives. This is about working as a group, at listening to the system and making the best decisions you can with the information you have at the time over the horizons that feel right for your business. And that is not something to be done on your own. You may be doing some of your thinking on your own, especially if you're more introverted in your personality type, and you might need that space to think. But then please make sure that you're coming together to share your thinking, caring about your colleagues, listening to them, so you can come up with the best solutions.
And more and more, we're talking that the number one skill that we need today, which is more relevant in these times than any time before, is adaptability. Sarah, how would you define adaptability?
For me, adaptability is believing, first and foremost, you can learn and change. So your talents are the starting point, and your ability to use your talents or experience in other ways is really important. It's about looking 1 year, 6 months, 3 months, whatever it looks like in the system, and thinking, actually, what might I need to be able to do in 3 months' time, and starting to take personal responsibility over that. I'm someone who loves to be in a room with a group. It's a hugely energizing place for me. And I've realized that's not going to be the case. So I've learned sort of whiteboards and some IT and some tech that can give as good an experience for my clients and colleagues as possible. I haven't been told to do that. I sort of looked ahead and think, well, what do I believe this system needs to be at its best? And actually, okay, how do I learn some of those skills? So it's about, one, believing we can change, and we can. Neuroscientists will tell you that at every age. And for me, that's massively exciting. And two, it's getting excited by learning, because I genuinely, as I said earlier, we're never the finished product. And no matter how good our experience is in one area, we can shift and change and pivot. And we've seen people pivot and companies pivot in when the rubric has been, it's not possible. Well, they've done it, it's happened, and it's taken that energy and cost. I know that for people, but it's equally, think of what we were like in Zoom calls at the beginning. We were like, I still hit the mute button every time, but we didn't know how to use it. We were watching our faces, all of those pieces, and yet this has become a learned skill. So it's about believing that we can shift and change.
Yeah. And it's also, would you say that it's also about letting go of the final outcome and letting go from the own pressure that we typically put on ourselves, which is I need to know the answer. We need to be moving forward. We're not moving forward, and basically letting go of that control, because it's only then that we're able to tap into our creativity and come up with innovative thinking and actually innovative solutions.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. It's about looking for more than one right answer. When we're adapting, not finding a route and running at it fast, back to my place of fear. It's about, and I am an activist. I have to watch this, even when I have leadership roles that I don't see an outcome and go, because often we feel in pressure and we want to get things done. So what are the more than one right answer? What could I be doing? What might I do? And then what will I do? And I think the other piece of letting go, and I really have seen people struggle with this, those of us who are very goal driven, so are very keen on setting a goal and going for it in this year of turbulence and flux, those of us who got security and maybe ego fed, but by achieving those goals, have had learned to.
Oh, Sarah, we've just lost you. Hopefully you'll be back.
This year, a more round, whole.
Sorry,
thoughtful.
Sarah. Oh, I just, I don't know if it was a Wi-Fi connection.
Yes.
We lost you for a minute. Do you mind rewinding? Right, okay, Sarah, we're still, we're back. It's jumping, this Wi-Fi. My apologies.
That's okay. It's what happens.
I had one last question around adaptability and letting go. Why does it seem to be so difficult for leaders to be able to let go and to encourage this collective solution finding? What is the number one reason that stops our organizational leaders from doing that?
I think again it comes from competition and results, P&L, being really clear on short term versus long term. So competition to stewardship, and actually how one of the things the New Zealand rugby team is very famous for is leaving the shirt in a better place. It's you are holding it for a moment and you are going to pass it on. And I think the short-termism, the competition, you use the word greed, but I'm not even sure it is greed. It's almost sort of being on this treadmill of what society, of what business expects of us can really drive some behaviors. And yet if we start to think about, there's a book by Matt McCartney called The Children's Fire. And if you think about, if you had the children's fire, which is future generations, whatever that looks like, I don't have my own children, but for those future generations that I would love to see, for what would it be like having them at the table as well? Because a lot of these companies maybe will be around in that time, maybe they won't, but the decisions they're making, how they're affecting society, the planet, working as a purpose, will be that legacy. And how can they show another way and role model another way and make other things other than short-term P&L as a really as a priority.
Mm, mm.
Mm.
Sarah, thank you so much. Now over to you, the listener. Sarah shared her past as a former Olympic and world champion in rowing. And Sarah, you talk about that you were brought up with labels, probably like the majority of us, you know, and always this, you know, what are you good at? What are you not good at? Okay, you're not good at that. So just, you know, make sure you hardwire that into your brain because you're not good at it. Okay. Till the end of your days, right? So it's that, you know, that continuous question, am I good enough? And so we sort of grow up, we a lot of us have grown up with that, am I good enough? And which reflects in the way that organizations have been built and have been running. We've talked a lot about competition. So how do you see competition within your organization? Sarah talks about competition that can be dangerously seductive. So is it something that you actually sort of, you know, secretly still love doing, you know, still beating that other person to, I don't know, whatever it is, yeah, typing up emails or, you know, racing them from one end of the corridor to the other, you know, whatever it is. But, you know, and how can you start moving away from this dangerously seductive competition, which is detrimental, which is potentially destructive in human relations, and moving into the new paradigm of stewardship, where you can be a better version of yourselves and encourage each other of becoming better and more caring versions of ourselves. With all this divide that's happening and that we are all personally feeling on lots of levels, we are all equally responsible in uniting and finding a more virtuous system. And creating a more sustainable workplace, starting with ourselves. I mean, if we don't owe it to ourselves, then why would we owe it to anybody else? So, and then we talked about adaptability and letting go. I mean, just the release of letting go and going, well, I don't have the answers. I'm not sure how this is going to go. Let's just get in a room together, or let's go for a walk together in the park and let's figure something out together. I mean, just that's already uniting people, and let's just start listening, because we're in this together, we're in this crisis, or we're faced with this adversity, whatever it is, but let's actively decide to change the way that we show up every day at work with people, like at home. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was really to have you. Thank you for your insights and your wisdom, and we'll speak again soon.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye-bye.